Hey, Andy, nice to see you again.
Good,
Hello.
good to see you too, Leslie. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great. I'm looking forward to tonight's topic because I feel like well, obviously we're on a roll. We're in this cultural aspect of relationships, and I think it's going to be a fun conversation to dive into. And it's not necessarily that it's a fun topic, but I think it's an interesting topic that's going to
Right.
be fun for us to talk about.
Yeah, our conversations are always fun. I enjoy them, and we seem to get a lot out of them. We seem to have a lot to offer, a lot to say between the two of us, and the chemistry that we have in our conversations is brilliant. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about stereotyping. That's a big conversation all by itself. I'm sure we can't contain it within an hour, but we'll do our best.
Yeah, and when you think about stereotyping, it's not really just about like the identities of people, how the color of their skin, but it could be just like your own gender stereotypes and
Yeah, yeah,
the different things that women say that men are, and the different things that men say that women are. And we're stereotyping, so
yeah,
it's going to be an
yeah.
interesting conversation, definitely.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, exactly. It will be an interesting conversation. It even goes further than that. Like we identify people by their culture, by their color, by their gender, by their religion. We also identify people by their lifestyle, even their jobs, or their chosen careers. We think of farmers differently than we think of lawyers, and we think of lawyers differently than we think of like construction workers and things like that. So even our careers and our, like, there's just so many ways that we stereotype people. When I worked in retail for many years, um, it was common for us to stereotype people, because we only had we only had a couple of minutes to really get into the conversation with a person. And so it was hard not to. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about in this conversation is when should we, and when is it bad? Because I believe the word stereotyping actually has a negative connotation, but the bare bones definition of it isn't necessarily a negative word.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think stereotyping is I think it's because we put this negative thing around what stereotyping is, and it's because of how we use the word. Like it really is. It's like how it. What does it say here? Like the view or represent as a stereotype, and so like, what does it really mean as far as when it comes to people? When it becomes when it's about a particular group or a class of people, is it because we've maybe taken some of the words that we use and bent them a little bit more to shape the way society thinks? And
Mm-hmm.
so now we've changed maybe a definition around, or we've
Yeah.
added on to it. And so for me, I think it's the reason why I think it has become a negative thing is because people do box specific genders, specific even classes, like especially like if you're poor, if
Mm-hmm.
you're
Yep.
middle class, if you're the
Rich.
upper 1%, you're being stereotyped, but you're being put in this box.
Yeah.
And those stereotypes, I think people look at as more, depending on where you fit in the spectrum of it, as being could be a positive thing or a negative thing. If you're like up here in the upper 1% or the 0.1% of the upper 1%, that would think that they would look at that as a badge of honor to be stereotyped in that respect. But
Right.
someone who's poor, and where is the line drawn for being poor too? Because
Right.
where it used to be at one point, even for the middle class, used to be at one point where the middle class that's where you wanted to be in that particular that that ranking of where you were on the financial scale. You wanted to be known as middle class because you were working America. You were the backbone of America. People looked at you, that you were like the one that you were the ones that really created the framework of how the country ran itself or survived. And
Yeah.
now being a middle class doesn't necessarily mean that you have the same privileges or um, the same social standing as you did way back when it was first, I think, coined. but
Yeah.
I couldn't really be 100% sure on that. But that's my own perspective of it. And so when you look at people who are considered poor, where is the line drawn now? Because it used to be a very, very low, and now it's raised itself. So now people who might have been considered, you know, I don't know if it's lower middle class or if there is such a thing, we're now considered, you know, very poor. And so like there's that whole stereotype then, if you're like, you hear the terminology, the other side of the tracks, that could mean a whole lot of different things. It could mean how you are, you know, if you are considered sexually promiscuous, or you grew up without much, and so you're considered, you know, those people. And so stereotypes, there's like a broad range.
There is a whole range, and they all come with their own separate set of expectations, right? Which is the broader conversations we've been having in these videos. Is the expectations that come with that. And I think part of the issue that we've got with stereotyping is that we stereotype people and then we lock them into those boxes. I found in retail it was useful to stereotype somebody to begin the conversation, as long as I then allowed them to come out of that box or put themselves into a different box or identify themselves in some other way. Through the conversation, I could find out a little bit more about them. And that stereotyping gave me a place simply to start the conversation. But I think a lot of the times we judge a person to be such and such a stereotype, and then we make a bunch of judgments about them based on that stereotype. Most of those judgments are negative judgments. You know, like a Muslim is a terrorist is one of those stereotyping judgments. And I think most of the world knows that that's just plain old not true, any more than, you know, Christians are all terrorists, and that's another judgment that many people have had. You know, it's these judgments these negative judgments that we have, that we use to identify who is safe and who is not as safe. And that's, I think, where the problems come in, is the expectations we put on people because of, you know, the stereotypes we've put them in. You know, we expect something different of a woman than we do of a man. We expect something different from a black person than we do from a white person. Something different yet again from an Asian person, which has been coming up in the news a lot lately. There's just so many different expectations, and that's, I think, what started the conversation for us in the broader sense, is that you and I were having conversations about expectations and how sometimes those expectations themselves are dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, just the stereotyping itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's the judgments we make about a person, the expectations we have of that person, and the way we then treat that person because of those stereotypes that can be bad. You know, that's, I think, where the danger points are, is that we don't always give the person we've stereotyped the freedom to then, you know, show us who their true self is.
Yeah, we don't give them the opportunity to actually show who they really are. And I think part of that too is you also then get that person to believe, if you tell them enough that they are this, that they fit into this box, and you don't give them the opportunities to, you know, prove, you know, and I don't even think a person should have to prove just because they fit into a different box, but it's being able to just show who they are. And because they've been told this for so long, they start adopting it as their own, saying, well, if you're telling me this is what I am, then I'm just going to be this person, you know? And so that's a sad truth. It's unfortunate, but it is a sad truth.
Yeah, it is a truth.
And so how do we like bridge the gap between, you know, these expectations and these stereotypes? Like, how do we, there's a gap, like there's obviously something missing that's causing people, even more so today, I think, have these opinions based on one encounter, or maybe a couple of encounters with another grouping of people. And so all people are like that. I can just give you a quick example. My husband and I, when we were living in Las Vegas, we lived in a building where, when we first moved there, it was our first residence. And my husband was assisting with cleaning the pool of the owner of the building. He was cleaning the pool for the building. And there was a gentleman on the very first floor that had somehow gotten a hold of the key to the maintenance room and had not returned it back to the owner. And so the owner had said that, just to go, or not the owner, but the person who had been left in charge with the key. And so when my husband went to knock on the person's door, the door slightly opened. So obviously they had a problem with their door either not closing correctly or it just wasn't closed correctly, because he knocked and then he stepped away and walked away.
Yeah.
And the guy came out, and he was a black man, and he came out, and my husband's white. So that, just to give context to what's going on here. And he proceeded to get very upset. And my husband just walked away from it and came back to the house. I happened to be off because I work from home. So I was there. And so when apparently the police came, and actually I wasn't home. I'd come home from the gym to find that the police were there, and they were talking to this young man. And apparently he had gone on a rampage, running around the building. It's a small building. So it was like maybe I think 16 or 18 units.
Right.
And he was banging on everyone's door looking for my husband. He never came up to the second floor, but he proceeded on the first floor, and the police were called. And all he kept saying was that all white people were the same. They all look the same. They all act the same. They all talk the same. And so that was his perception. He obviously had some encounter with someone once before and put everyone in that box who fit that, who was white, who was male, and they fit into that box. And so, and that's a sad truth too, because people have an experience, and if it's negative and they have nothing else to back it up to be positive, they automatically assume that every encounter is going to be negative. So like that's another stereotype, but they're building on it because they're not looking outwardly themselves to see if they can find maybe some holes in that truth.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And actually that last statement right there, they're not looking for maybe some holes in the truth. A lot of times our fears take a hold, and all we see is the bad parts. Even when the good parts do show, even when we do have good encounters with somebody of that stereotype, we don't always acknowledge those. We don't always even give them credit. We might say, okay, well, I've had, a couple of negative encounters with this particular stereotype, so now I'm going to stereotype everybody in that stereotype is the same way. And even though I might have an encounter, or even a few encounters that counter that stereotype, that don't fit into that stereotype, my brain and the fears that it's our brains are keyed to run on fear. They're designed to help us avoid danger. So we often don't even, like, if it doesn't fit our fears, then we don't notice it. We don't pay attention to it. And that's where it takes an intentional effort to try and actually seek the holes in our theories. And it took me many years actually to learn that, I'm allowed to, poke holes into these fears. I'm allowed to allow people to be whatever they want to be. And that allowed me to then, have legitimate and sincere conversations with even with just customers at my store. It would be a 5-minute relationship, but we would actually connect and become friends for those 5 minutes. Right. And I think that's how we bridge the gap, is we try intentionally to poke holes into those stereotypes. We try intentionally to see if there's somebody that doesn't fit, or even somebody who does fit but doesn't fit completely. Maybe this white person is racist. Maybe this white person is Christian. Maybe this white person is right wing, and maybe this white person is very much fits most of the stereotype that we have of white people, and he still is okay to talk to other people and want to expand his horizons, and he likes to talk philosophically, or or something else, whatever the case may be that breaks the stereotype, right? Maybe this woman that we're talking to, she likes to be a stay-at-home mom and look after the children and cook the meals, and maybe she also is a very brilliant business person and is the reason her husband's business is succeeding.
Yep.
They can still live in the stereotypes and break outside of them. We don't necessarily have to break the stereotype completely, but we can still allow the people to be whatever part of that or no part of that they want. I did find it useful to begin the conversation from that place. So I would talk to a woman differently than I would talk to a man. I would talk to a farmer differently than I would talk to a guy in a suit. However, oftentimes those conversations within 30 seconds or a minute would swap to a completely different direction. I can't name the number of conversations I had with farmers that were far more intelligent and far more philosophical than I did with the business guys who had all of these advanced degrees. It's just a matter of allowing them to then express who they really want to be. It's not a bad thing to have a stereotype to give a person a place to start from, but it can be a bad thing to leave them there and not let them escape that stereotype.
Yeah, and I like that. And and that kind of, so I know that we usually don't plug anything, but it kind of just reminds me of your Unconditional Boundaries podcast.
Yeah.
And I love that because you talk about the boundaries being, you're not setting that expectation, because again, we've said expectations is I-centered, it's not we inclusive. And so I love the fact that you talk about that in your podcast, because you do talk about how, you might have this expectation from someone, but if you are leaving, and if you have a boundary, it depends on what that boundary is. So you're either saying, yes, I'm allowing this space between us and we can have this conversation, or I feel a certain way, and so we can't have it both ways, right? But I love the fact that you talk about it, and I think that could be even like something you could talk about even in this particular genre of stereotyping, even in your podcast, because I think it does lean into that. I'm not sure really where I'm going with this, other than just to say that I just was fascinated by the podcast because I liked your take on it. It wasn't, you were saying that it's okay to have, you might not get what you need because, again, it's I-centered, but you will definitely get what you need if you allow yourself to just say, you know what, everything is going, it's okay if these people that are in my life are in my life, or they're not in my life at this time. And this is based on a specific conversation you're having. And I know it's probably a little bit confusing for the people that are listening, but definitely check out this podcast. This is, I know we don't usually plug, but I really feel like you're onto something. This podcast, and that is why I'm mentioning it right now, because I really feel like the conversations that we have, you're having even more deeper conversations about that in your podcast. So, but anyways, let's get back to what we're talking about here, stereotyping. So here's the thing about stereotyping that I wanted to just ask you about, because so you get people who might have, especially because I know in the US, for what I know, obviously there's more racial tension in the US than there is when in Canada than Canada, as far as like between the Black community and the white community, as far as how they've gone through the generations. I think Canada has been maybe less vocal about it. I don't know, because I really don't know. There could be underlying things that I never really experienced, but I do know that the experience that I had growing up, although I had a few that were not so pleasant, it wasn't a normal way of life for me to have unpleasant experiences with different ethnic groups, with white people, with Black people, with Asian people, with different, because we're multi-diverse, right? Yeah. And so multicultural. And so I was just curious, when it comes to stereotyping, I think how do we like bridge that? Because I know, like, what I'm getting at here is that there is an underlying, like, I don't know if it's animosity, but there's not only fears, but there's anger from different encounters and things that are going on in the news, and you don't see like there's any justice. You feel like there's no justice, and so the stereotype, I think, then starts going towards, okay, well, if it's white police officers and it's a black person that's being detained or has been shot, there's that stereotype that all white police officers are racist, or they're going, you know what I'm saying? So there's got to be a conversation around that to facilitate some positive change. And I'm not sure what that is, because as I said, I didn't have major issues growing up in Canada, but I started seeing some differences in the US, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. There does need to be conversations, and I have seen some of those conversations pop up on different places in social media, in different places online, and different groups that I've been a part of, where a white police officer will, welcome conversations from all people, including blacks or Hispanics or Asian or whatever, and or a black person will say, my experience with police officers is not the same as what I'm hearing on the media. So that conversation is happening, and I think that's what the solution is to this is we, in order to heal this wound, especially in America. It's in Canada too. Like you said, we don't feel it as predominantly here, but it does exist. Racism still exists here. But in order to heal this wound, we have to have those conversations. We need to be able to have a space where we can hold those grievances and actually listen to the harm that has been done, because there has been harm done on all sides. There's been harm done. Police officers have shot black men, innocent black men. And more than once, innocent black people have been jailed simply because they're black. And black people have attacked policemen because of that fact. So there has been injury on all sides of this case. So in order for that conversation to happen, there needs to be some space for those grievances to be heard, for those hurts to be acknowledged, and maybe for some recompense to happen. There needs to be some ability to say, yeah, I hear your anger, and I apologize for my part or my society's part of that. And I'm willing to make amends and join the conversation. Will you also do the same with me? Right. And I think that's what's required, is because I've seen some people piping up and say, yeah, I apologize for myself or the people like me who've done injustice. Can we have this conversation? And I've seen people step up and voice their grievances. What I haven't seen much of yet is both sides doing that in the same conversation. I've seen both sides doing it, but usually the only people responding are the people with grievances, and they're not actually having the conversation yet for both sides, where both sides share their grievances, both sides offer to make amends, and both sides offer to build a relationship, at the end of it.
Yeah. And I think partly too, I think, is that it might be hard for the conversations, but they need to be had. And I think more than one conversation, because I think when you have a lot of built up frustration over society and how you might have been stereotyped, put in a box, treated a certain way, and have voiced your opinion or your grievances. I think part of it is having the conversations, having multiple conversations, so that at some point in the conversations, you're not leading from a place of blame, of anger, of hurt, but you're actually saying, okay, now that I've gotten it off my chest, now let's have that conversation, how we can start moving forward and make change. I don't think it's one conversation, because I think when people only have one conversation, you might get some resolution, but a lot of I've just heard different people when they talk about different things like the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Asian culture where they're getting stereotyped for the pandemic and people are being attacked. I can see people are very angry because of what they're being told, and or what they're experiencing, and there's not those conversations being had where they can say, okay, this is how I feel, this is how I'm feeling, this is like I'm angry because of this, and really being able to just, even if it hurts your feelings, being able to tell you to your face, like, I want to be able to have this conversation with you, but I want to tell you that you're a jerk and that I hate you, and that, and and they may not even really hate you, but it's actually just to say, and I hate people like you because that's my experience. And then you can come back to the conversation and again and say, okay, I got it off my chest. And you're like saying, okay, yeah, well now and you get to say, well, I don't like you and I don't like your people either because this is my experience. And you guys have that conversation, be open and honest and really raw, and be okay to take it, because a lot of the time I've noticed that both sides can have their opinion, and it doesn't mean I'm just black and white. It could be both sides of any stereotype has their opinion, and they're not willing to listen to really hear what the other side is saying, and so all they come to the table with is their own grievances and feeling like, okay, well, you're not, almost like they got a wall up, like, I'm not ready to listen to you, I'm only want you to hear me.
Right.
And so the conversations really don't go as far as they need to. And that's why I think there needs to be more conversation, like more than just one between the same grouping of people.
Yeah, I agree. I believe it is. I believe we do need to keep coming back to the table until such a time is that we feel our grievances have been heard. Mm-hmm. And like you said, that often usually takes more than one conversation. Sometimes in the first conversation, I might feel some of the things were heard. Often I don't feel anything was heard. So it does take, time and time again to come back to the conversation. And there does need to be some sort of boundaries set up to you in the conversation, so that maybe we say, well, we switch sides, and I'll listen to your grievances the first time, you listen to my grievances the next time, and we'll just alternate back and forth until we both feel our grievances have been heard. And once you can come to the conversation without needing your grievances to be heard, and you feel your grievances have been heard, when you can come to the conversation from that place, like you were saying at the start, when you can come to the conversation without those feelings, because you feel that they have been heard, you feel like you've gotten out what you needed to get out, that's when the healing actually begins. And like you were saying, there oftentimes the healing doesn't happen because we just stop at the grievances part. We just stop at I hate you and everybody who looks like you, and you hate me and everybody who looks like me, and now what? And I don't want to go back to that conversation over and over and again, because first of all, it hurts to say I hate you, and it hurts to hear you say that you hate me. So I don't want to come back to that conversation. And what you were speaking to is it's going to require a bit of a thick skin. It's going to require a bit of bravery. It's going to require us to be willing to be hurt, for us to be willing to be attacked sometimes, because on the other side of those feelings, on the other side of those expressions, is connection, is joy, is real love, is the healing, the sharing, the community, the values that our nations have been built on are on the other side of those conversations. Mm-hmm. When we can come to the table having had our voices heard, and we can show up and say, now that you've heard my grievances and I've heard your grievances, what can we do going forward? Absolutely. That's where the really real healing happens. And I don't think there's been enough of those conversations just yet.
No.
And whether we're talking black or white, or whether we're talking Asian, or whether we're talking religious differences, or gender differences, or whether we're talking Canadian and American. I've seen Canadians stereotype Americans and vice versa. Whatever it is, whatever the stereotypes are, unless we can come to the table willing to accept the pain from the other side and hear their pain, and then let them listen to our pain, and then keep coming till that's done and there's more to say, that's when the healing happens. And that's the conversations I want to get involved in. And I think that's what you and I are doing here.
Yeah, and those conversations, once you get to those conversations, don't stop, because you're finding ways then to work together to make changes in your community. Because if two people, like we talked about this, where you might have a friend, you said, like in a grouping of friends, where your friends might not like your group, the person that
Right.
you're talking to, and his group of friends, and vice versa. His group of friends might not like you and the crowd you hang out with. But the two of you have come together with a meeting of minds and understand each other and like each other and want to pursue that friendship. You obviously, you either decide you are going to do it or you're not, whether you allow your friends to, your peers to influence you, or you just say, you know what, this is my decision for me that I choose. And I think that's where it comes to the racial, and that word kind of bothers me anyways. But just the stare, well, it does, because
Yep.
I feel like there's one race, so that's why
Right.
this whole word, this whole division, saying that I'm a different race than you when we're the same race, we're
Yeah.
humans. So that's
You chop us open, you're going to find all the same parts.
yeah, exactly. So that's why that word kind of bothers me, in that respect. But I guess I couldn't come up with something better. But just these conversations that people have where they say someone else is different than them, so they don't like them, or someone else has different customs, so they don't like them. So they're stereotyping them because of their customs. They stereotype them because of how they look, how they dress, how much money they make. Uh, if you're even stereotyped if you grew up in a single family home, or if you grew up with
Yeah.
two parents, if you grew up in social housing like I did, because I did, I grew up in social
Me too.
housing, or you grew up in where your parents, you had a nice, beautiful home and you grew up that way.
I grew up in
If
a
you,
trailer park.
yeah, see, so there you go. And then, so I'm sure you got stereotyped too, right? There's that whole stereotype around that. Or, like you make a certain amount of money, or you went to, if you did, you either went to school or you were a dropout from school. So, I mean, that's a stereotype, right? So it really is like there's so many different things that we say about each other. And that's where we're dividing ourselves. I think we divide ourselves more and more by the stereotypes that we put on each other, because we're all obviously we're trying to define each person that we come into, we encounter. And it's like, it's not really fair, because you look at people who are, for example, another grouping of people are homeless people.
Mhm.
One of my friends, really good friends, his dad is homeless. Well, the last I heard, he was homeless, and it was by choice. Really nice guy, a phenomenal chef, but that was by choice. Now, does that, I don't know all the backstory.
Yeah.
I haven't had the conversation with him. I haven't seen him for years, but that was, that's another grouping of people who are now stereotyped. Oh, you're homeless. Oh, so you're no good. You're thrown away. Oh, so you're, and you have people who are, they grew up in foster care, and now they're in group homes, and that's a whole stereotype. I mean, there's just so many things that we stereotype. We put these definitions on people based on their wherever they grew up socially, what they bring to the table, whether they're intellectual or not, whether they went to university or college or not, whether they make above six figures or not, like where you stand as, if you're poor, if you're middle class, and if middle class even exists anymore. I don't know if you're in the upper 1%. This is all stereotypes based on outside things, that labels that people give each other. And then on top of that, then I think it's what I'm thinking is, what I'm seeing is happening, is that once someone has a label on them, that's how I find people are approaching that person as. So if someone is homeless someone's homeless and you walk up to them, but all of a sudden you start having this brilliant conversation with them, your first impression, though, before you even encounter this person maybe walking up to you to have a conversation, was this person's homeless, and you might want to just throw them away, that they're not important. That's just a sad fact. That's how people are thinking. But
Mhm.
this person walking up to you could have had something happen in their life. It could be recent. It could be that they're just haven't caught a break, and they have a brilliant mind, and you have one of the best conversations you've ever had.
Yeah.
It's just, we approach people based on the stereotypes they've been given, and we don't even allow ourselves to go in And I think I said this to you before. It's like putting two kids on a playground and just say like there's just different colors. So like one's black and one's white. And there's nobody else around. And they start playing around. And all of a sudden now they're like talking to each other and they're having a great time. And there's nothing to influence them, right?
Except the sand or the swing set.
Until somebody comes in and says something.
Yeah.
And that's when the dynamic can change. And so that's yeah, we can have conversations around that too. I know. I'm going down the rabbit hole, Andy.
We do that on occasion in these conversations.
I know.
Yeah,
but it just makes me think about that,
Yeah, and that's exactly it. At our core, we are all one person. We are all the same, we have the same emotions. We have the same drivers. We have the same intentions. We all want love and happiness. We want to avoid dangerous things. Those are the things that we all want. Everybody wants those things. Mm-hmm. And the stereotypes that we use, we simply use them to put people into a box to help us identify them. We do need those. We do need to be able to put a stereotype on somebody, because we can't just walk up to everybody and say, who are you and how are you, how are you going about in the world? Like the stereotypes give us some place to start. So those are important, and it's dangerous for us to leave somebody in those places. And it's dangerous for us to make negative judgments. Like you've said, I've had some brilliant conversations with some homeless people. I've also been scared by some homeless people. Like I've had some homeless people walk up and attempt to harm me. I've had some homeless people walk up and attempt to steal from me. But I've had not homeless people do the same thing. Yeah. I've had people who look like they're reasonably comfortable financially do the same thing. We stereotype people, and we classify them as dangerous, and that's, I think, the problem that we use stereotyping for. We use stereotyping to classify how someone might be dangerous. Yeah. A lot of men, especially divorced men, have a negative judgment of women, so they will put a judgment on women, and therefore they will guard their conversations or their experiences with women because of the damage they've had. Or women will do the same thing with men. If women have been harmed by men, they'll do the same thing oftentimes, is they'll put a guard up, or if I've been hurt by corporations. I personally don't like working for a corporate company because I've been hurt by lots of corporate companies. So I have a stereotype for what corporations, what I'm willing to do with corporations.
Can you hold on just 1 second? I have to walk away for 1 sec, okay?
Certainly. Yep. Sounds good.
Apologize for that, guys. Again, life, that's life, right?
Life gets in the way sometimes. That's why we do these live. That's why we do these live, so that we're real people and we're not just we're not just making shit up here.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sorry to have interrupted your thought.
That's okay. That's one of the stereotypes that I have is of employment. Is the corporations that I have worked for. I have stereotyped them as being, careless or cold or greedy, when I'm sure that that's not actually where they are. I mean, no corporation that I've ever known of cares only about the money. All corporations care about the people that are involved, their clients, their customers, the people, the employees, the people that work for them. All companies do care on some level for everybody involved, for all the people involved. Just when there comes a conflict between the money and the people, every corporation has a different way of dealing with those conflicts. And that's where my stereotypes have come from. And actually, I would be willing to bet that a lot of other people have a similar stereotype of corporations. So, and stereotypes do stop us from being able to interact with other people in their true heart, with our true heart, with what's really at our core, and figure out what's really at their core. And I think that's one of the things that allowed you and I to start this channel, to start these conversations, is that we had, we probably started out with, when we first met, with a couple of stereotypes of each other, and quickly within that first conversation moved past those stereotypes into, oh, what? Wait a minute, you're a people, I'm a people. Let's just talk and see how that goes.
Yeah, and it's funny. I don't recall having stereotypes. I think with you when we first started talking, I think sometimes we might think people are having these stereotype thoughts, but I definitely know in some of the conversations that we've had in our group that it might have been a thought around something in particular. But I typically have always approached, I think, conversations with people, letting them show me who they are by just their words and actions, and then going from there. I think I've learned over time, especially when you told me about, like, about the when I talked about homeless people way back when. I remember I was modeling at the time, and it was cold. It was in Toronto, downtown Toronto, and it was a really cold day. And of course, when you're modeling outside in the cold, it doesn't matter if you're wearing like the outfit of choice. You're not warm. You have to look like you're like warm. But anyways, in between shots, this guy came over. He was homeless. He came over and he gave me his coat. And at first, I thought I could be ill, but then it was like, oh, thank you, right? Because I realized he was coming from a really good place.
Yes.
And so I could have been that person who said, like, ew, like, don't touch me, or be embracing of this person's kindness. And so not putting them in the box that everyone puts them in. And so I think that is just part of it. And it could really, I think, come from, I've always been empathetic towards other people. It's just been a part of my makeup since I was a child. And I believe that that's probably why it has been easier for me to do that in most situations. But I know that it can be a very difficult thing for people to just let others in without the stereotypes that they put on them, and allowing someone to come in, like you said yourself. We didn't know each other when we first started talking, and we could have just both looked at each other and started making assumptions about what that person is like, just the way they speak or the things they talk about. We could have made all kinds of assumptions, but instead I don't believe either one of us came from that place.
No.
But there are people that would do that. The first thing they do is when they see you, they make this definition of who they think you are before you speak a word. And that's unfortunate. And that's why I feel like the conversations probably will be difficult in the beginning, in these conversations that people need to have to bridge the gap between the feelings instead of using coming from the emotional center, using the amygdala being heightened, whereas then the prefrontal cortex is turned off, so their thinking center doesn't allow them to have conversations with someone else where it's coming from a logical place, rather it's coming from an emotional place. And so we've talked about this before. A lot of times people, when they're hurt, they're speaking with their emotions instead of stepping away from it and then approaching it. And so those conversations are going to be hard. There are people out there who have those movements out there that are talking, making these conversations around our differences and letting people speak. But I also see some of those conversations are still centered on how I feel wronged, instead of how can we talk about how we feel so that we can bridge the gap and move outside of the stereotype you feel that you've been placed in? Can we talk from that place? Can we have honest couple? Can we have a few conversations? We both get it out of our system and be okay and agree with each other, because again, you don't want to have an expectation of what the other person's going to think or feel, but you want to be able to have that agreement with each other that I'm going to let you have, I'm going to allow you the space, you're going to allow me the space, and then when we've gotten it all out, let's talk about it, like what we've shared. Let's talk about it and how we can move forward and not hang on to the stuff, because I think that's what's happening is people hang on to the stigmas of the stereotypes, and then they take that with them in their life as a chip on their shoulder. And instead, when they do have these conversations, some of them are going to take longer than others, I think. Might be a little harder than others because they've been holding on to those stigmas. But I think that if we allow them to actually get it off their chest, really like let it go, then those conversations afterwards can be really powerful, and we can make change. Yeah. And I think that's just, it's got to start somewhere. But how do we get the conversation started? Because again, a lot of people will come from the blame shifting scenario. Like it's all about how they've been wronged, and it's not taking because we have to still take responsibility for our actions. It's like I could come over there, like I think you've even said this before. If I could reach through the screen and punch you in the face, right?
Yep.
I don't know. Right? I'm not going to sit here going and say, okay, Andy, I punched you in the face, so now you have to respond a certain way. It's up to you to decide how you're going to respond. So that's, and I know.
And my response.
I'm thinking, how ridiculous does that sound, like me reaching through the screen? But that's a true.
But my responsibility then is, or my response then is my responsibility. That's why it's called my response. Because it's my responsibility. It's my ability to respond.
Yeah.
When you hit me in the face, I'm going to feel some pain. Yeah. What I do with that pain, how I choose to react to you or choose not to react to you, those are my responsibility. Those are the choices that I get to make. And to speak to what you were saying a moment ago, if we're going to heal these conversations, I was thinking about that while you were talking. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to take longer than others. So, and to go back to your analogy of a group of friends, where I'm with my group of friends, you're with your group of friends, and you and I are friends, but our friends are not friends. Yeah. That's how the conversation heals. You and I heal the damage first. And we still need to stay within our group of friends. We still need to relate to them as well. Yeah. But not by letting them choose our personality, but by showing them how we can be compassionate to the other side. Yeah. I can be compassionate to you. Maybe I can't yet be compassionate to your group of friends, but I can be compassionate to you. You can be compassionate to me. And by extension, we can show them how to be compassionate to each other. So they might be the ones who take longer to come around, and to have the conversations, to let their feelings out and let their feelings actually flow out of their body rather than stick around. Mm-hmm. They might take longer to do that, but we can guide them. We can mediate. We can assist. The people who have an easier time relating to other people, you can help your culture, your stereotype, your group of people. You can help them to come to the table. You can help them come into the conversation by showing them, I'm still that cowboy farmer down home redneck. I'm still that guy, and I'm still going to talk like that, and I'm going to drop all kind of F-bombs. And I can still talk to all the people on the other side of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And if I can, then you can too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And exactly, leading so that we can become leaders of our groups rather than followers of our groups. Because those of us who can find compassion, we are being called in our world right now, all over the planet, to step up, to lead, to become the leaders, because our world is looking for leaders. We are sick of the leaders that have been telling us all this divisive conversation for generations.
Yeah.
We're done with those leaders. We want leaders who will bring us together. And those leaders are coming from one side or the other with compassion.
Yeah.
And that's the conversations we want to have.
Yeah.
And society wants that. More and more of society wants that. So that's how I think we can start this, is by starting with those people who have a connection or can make a connection with somebody on the other side, and then bringing in the people who more easily can connect but haven't yet, and then just kind of slowly rippling out from there, and understanding that there's always going to be people on the fringes that are just not going to connect.
Yeah.
There's always going to be that outside that's just going to be divisive no matter what you do.
Yeah.
But they're not the majority. They're often the majority voice, as in they're the voice that's heard the loudest, but they're not the majority in numbers.
True. Yeah. And I think that's just being okay with the fact that you're going to have those naysayers in your group. You're going to have those people who are always maybe going to question your ability to step over into another community, to talk to other people, to uh, you know, be this different person that is inclusive rather than, exclusive, because they can't influence you to be that way. And I think that's just a reflection of how their own, their own insecurities around themselves. And that at some point, hopefully they come around, but it's not your responsibility. The responsibility is just for how we show up in the world in our conversations with other people, and being able to peel away those stereotypes before we have the conversation. Because again, we're not going to be able to make any changes if we always come to the conversation already saying you're A, B, and C, and now let's talk, instead of allowing them to be able to show you through their words and actions who they are. Because again, they could fit into that stereotype, and that's their stereotype. But there could be people in that stereotype that are completely oblivious to it, and they're nothing like that. But because they look a certain way, or they're in a certain group of people, or they dress a certain way, or they make a certain amount of money, or whatever that is, they're going to be placed in that stereotype without even really having the knowledge of it or having the choice. And so I like to allow someone to make the choice of where do you want, like, how do you want to be defined? Because if that's the stereotype you want to be defined as, then that's your choice. But if you want to be defined as much more than that, and instead of being exclusive and you want to be inclusive, then let's have that conversation. And even if you say things that I don't like and I say things that you don't like, we can at least agree that we have these emotions, these feelings that have been maybe building up over our lifetimes, watching, whether it's maybe not something we've personally experienced, but watching other people that are close to us have experienced it, and we're not happy with it, and so we come from that place. But at least if we can have, like you said, an honest conversation about each thing that we have that we're bringing to the table, and just get it off our chest, say it all out, get it all out, and then be able to say, okay, we've said our piece, we've talked about it, we've listened to each other. Now, how can we take what we've learned from each other and move forward? Because again, otherwise, we're just going to be dividing and continually dividing until at some point, I don't know, because there seems to just be a lot of division going on. I mean, you look at it just as an example, like when it comes to politics in the U.S., and you have there's an actual line drawn in the sand. You're either Republican or you're Democrat, and there's an actual line. And I always thought that regardless of which party that you're affiliated with, it should be country first. So whoever you're voting into office to run whatever political area, whether it's your mayor, your city councilman, or your senator, your governors, or your president and vice president, all of those people, that it should be who's the best candidate for the country, for the job. Is not usually how employers actually, like, when they interview people. It's the same thing. So
in a perfect world, yes.
Right. And so there is a division, and it's one or the other. And there is no in between. There's no choice. You don't get to make a choice of your own. You don't get to choose if you're a Democrat to vote Republican. You don't, well, maybe, I don't know. Um, if you're Republican and you are, maybe you are influenced by the people in your life. If you try to cross over into Democratic world and vote there, are you influenced by the people and by the people that are in your community? And can you do it? Or are you only the person that will say, well, I would rather vote Democrat, but I can't because, my party and my friends and my family, and of course I'd be disowned. So there really is a line drawn. It's like, how do we, that's a gap there that I would love to be able to, it needs to be mended. Like, I think there's some healing that needs to go on there. It shouldn't be about party affiliation. It should be about the country. But anyways, that was just an example that I had around.
Yeah,
just like
I agree, and that's another version of stereotyping. We stereotype people that are based on whether or not they're Republican or Democrat, right? Both of those sides have some strong stereotypes.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and the people that I know on both sides, most of them don't fit the stereotype.
Yeah.
They fit pieces of it here and there, but they don't fit the whole stereotype.
Exactly.
Right.
And so that's being open to that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my perspective. So just to kind of wrap up a little bit here, what I've discovered in this conversation is that even approaching the concept of stereotypes, you and I are a little bit different in that you don't like to stereotype anybody at all. You like to give everybody the freedom of being whoever they want to be, right from the very beginning of the conversation, right from when you see them, when you meet them. Most of them, you'll never actually talk to them, but you still let them be whoever it is they want to be, and you let their words and actions determine that. Whereas I like to stereotype people to start with so that I have a place to begin the conversation with, and then let them, come out of that box as freely as they choose to. So even that, there's a little bit of difference. And guess what? We still had a respectful conversation like two human beings, like we can do, like we're, and so I wanted to wrap that up is that we, it's not about who's right and wrong. It's not about the best way to think. It's not about, stereotyping is bad or stereotyping is good. It's not about, you're a woman and I'm a man and one of us is right and the other one's wrong. It's not about any of those things. It's about, can we come to the conversation with all of our raw feelings, express ourselves, feel heard, and continue the conversation past that into some sort of collaboration, some sort of creation where we build a thing that's actually going to help people, going to make a difference either in our lives and the lives of our loved ones, or maybe in a larger scale like what you and I are doing with this channel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that, and I think you kind of just brought it home because we are coming to the top of the hour, and I think it's just you're right. It's like and I will say you're right because it is coming to that place where it's not like there's one right answer, and there's not like it's because you're male that your responses, your insights, your opinions are more important than mine. We each have our own opinions. We each have our own things to bring to the table. And it's just what our audience will take away from that is what I'm hoping that you take away from this is that you can actually have that encounter like I talk about on the school ground in the park with just you and someone else with nobody else influencing your words and your actions. It's just coming just as two human beings meeting and learning about each other without anybody externally influencing you to act a certain way or to feel a certain way. That is my hope, that people can have that kind of relationship, that kind of experience. And so, but yeah, I love this conversation. It is the end of the hour, so I want to say thank you so much to those of you who are watching or will watch it back. Andy, definitely, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. There's
as always
more that we could have talked about. We will be going live again in a couple of weeks on July 8th, Thursday, July 8th. We do go typically the first and last, second and last.
Second and fourth, I think, is what the number was. The second and fourth
Thursday.
Just in case there's a 5, because we don't do it on that.
Just in case there's a fifth week, yeah. So definitely, if you liked this video, please press the like it. But we'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of our videos, because we will be not only talking about cultural things, but we're going to be getting back to other types of relationships and expectations. And I'm excited for where we take this going forward.
Yeah,
And
me too.
definitely check out Unconditional Boundaries. It's really a great podcast. You will learn a lot, especially if there's people, things that you need to like get through, but you need some kind of insight on how to do it. Definitely, I plug that for you all day long. I really love it.
Thank you very much for that. I'm feeling the love there. Thank you. You'll find it on Spotify for those who are looking. It's in many other places too, but I haven't been able to find it on Apple Podcasts just yet. I don't know what the process looks like to get there, but it is on Spotify, so you can find it there. Yeah. Thank you for that, Leslie. It's I feel the love with that. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. And so on that note, I guess everyone, we will see you next time. Hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Bye for now.
Yeah.